Hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. Please put your hands together to welcome Mark Cousins. Thank you. We have about 25 minutes for a Q&A, and I'd love to invite questions from the audience. I think both Orson's work and Mark's work will really draw out questions, and everybody will have their own kind of relationship to both of these filmmakers' work. Mark, maybe you can stand on the inside so you can see the audience a little better this way. Firstly, you mentioned in your introduction that the work that we know of yours, both in writing and projection of work in your programming in filmmaking, is very much about looking at a hidden canon within film. But with this film, you've chosen a filmmaker who is very much within the canon of cinema history, and with a different lens. You're looking with a different eye at his work. I wondered if you could speak a little bit, firstly, about what that meant to you, but also what you're trying to do with this film for the audience who may know Orson's work already.
Yeah, Orson Welles feels like one of the great figures in Hollywood industrial cinema. But as we know, he was the enemy within. He was an experimental artist within the machine. He was the ghost in the machine, you know. So to look at his work, which was against the grain, it was conflicted with some of Hollywood's methods, etc., is sort of not to look at a mainstream figure. I love George Cukor, I love Howard Hawks, I love these figures who didn't fight the system. But of course, these kind of contradictions in Orson Welles are fascinating. People, when I started this film, I knew that Orson Welles was very contradictory. Afterwards, I thought, he's even more contradictory. He's even more admirable than I thought. All that stuff about Officer X, some of you will have known that, but isn't that extraordinary how brave and courageous he was? And also he was more of a dick than I thought, you know, in the way that he, you know, in his romantic life, etc., he didn't treat people all that well sometimes, you know, and these kind of, you know, I contain multitudes, that Walt Whitman thing. So that's why it didn't feel like I was making something about a Hollywood figure in some way. You know, and also his fascination, when you look at what he was really attracted to, what worlds was he attracted to? The Celtic world, the Latin world, the Arab world. You know, this was this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant guy who's propelled by excess, by that kind of Rilke over-living type thing. You know, who did he fall in love with? Hardly any, you know, sort of typical Americans. You know, it was Dietrich, it was Hayworth, who's of course South American. You know, it was Dolores del Rio, etc. You know, and so there's that kind of propulsion in him, which is compelling.
And I particularly love this, the kind of medium to tell this story and to reframe his eye and his way of looking at the world is drawing. And it's drawing for me was also a way of kind of finding film, finding images, the way that you first associate dexterity with looking, and a way of really reframing how you look at the world by having to observe it in a different way, and then translate that to your own perception and translate it to your own means of creating a line. But it's often, I feel, drawing is often named doodling. It's often called sketching and rejected as this something that is more like a hobby or a pleasure in a way. And I wondered, in relation to your filmmaking and in relation to your own, if you draw yourself, if you could talk a little bit about the craft and the process of sketching out within your filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, those of you who draw, I draw, I doodle, quite a lot, and when I'm nervous, I do it. It calms you down to draw. It focuses you when you're sort of wound up about something. And I think for Welles, there was this quality in it. Orson Welles spent a lot of his time frustrated with the system, the point that I made earlier. And frustration comes out in your hand, when you draw really fast, as Welles did. We saw a bit of sketching there, really fast. That little artwork I showed at the beginning and the introduction will have taken 2 minutes. And the thing about drawing is that the industrial system of filmmaking is quite slow, but drawing is so responsive to your thought. In fact, it's ahead of your thought. The thought comes afterwards. And therefore, it has relations to questions like mental health, kind of the free flow of thought and the pleasure of making a line or making a shape. You know, that pleasure comes, I really have a sense that he just couldn't stop himself. You know, it's a kind of euphoric thing almost to draw, and I really think that's true. And I noticed that when I remember in this cinema a few years ago, we showed, you know, that thing I made, the story of film, which was 15 and a half hours, we showed it in here, and I was shiting myself. I was so miserable. And I remember going out and drawing stuff, drawing the outside of this building. And immediately I felt that self-loss, which you're always looking for, or at least I'm always looking for. And I think that's my hunch, is that's when Welles got that kind of rapture of self-loss.
And you, with the archive that you got access to, is it a particular moment now where you think that material will go on to be published? Is it a moment where suddenly it is accessible?
Yes, there's a book coming out later this year. We're doing an exhibition of most of the artworks you've seen in here, plus a lot of others, in the Edinburgh Festival this summer. And that box of stuff that's still sitting in my flat, and I'm desperate to get rid of
in
my pocket as well. Yeah, we're putting that in show in Edinburgh, and then it's going to go on tour. And then Orson Welles' daughter, Beatrice, would like to sell it to either an institute, an organisation, or individuals. I think, as you can see in the film, some universities have already bought the art of Orson Welles, and Michigan, Indiana, etc. Steven Spielberg has bought some of it, but it's going to become available to sell.
And I wondered if you could talk a little more about the process, using these images as, you know, the inspiration to look into Orson's life and beginning to sketch out your own investigation, one that went beyond what you knew, went beyond your kind of bookshelf collection of what you knew about Orson.
Yeah, you read all the books and then you forget all the books. It's not the way I think. There are many filmmakers and creative people here in the audience, and you want to, at least my way is to absorb all the information and then try to shove it to a part of your brain which isn't processing it all the time. And therefore you want to almost like dream about it in some way, or you want to get to think about the drawings in a way that isn't too analytical or too factual or too historical, etc. And so I remember that bit in the film towards the end where I was watching Lady from Shanghai and that cigarette, and I thought, wow, you know, that just pure graphic movement really reminded me of the kind of line that you see in some of his work. And you know, when you're looking at art or when you're looking at drawing, you do have to know stuff as much as possible. You have to master that knowledge, but also you have to balance that knowledge with other things. Like you're looking at the poetics or something, you know, and you're trying to get to some kind of poetics.
I guess that's
and it's to do with you know, your sense of line or graphic. People who make imagery often will always put the horizon at the same point. I will always look for a diagonal, or I will always look for a 1/5, 4/5 composition. You know, it's sort of instinctive. And Welles had that, and you're trying to defocus enough to see the instinctive properties in his visual imagination.
Yeah, the signature to an
signature.
extent. Yeah. I'd like to invite questions from the audience, because I'm sure there are many out there. We'll start with this gentleman. There is a roving mic on its way. Yeah.
Just to follow on from
Keep your hand up, sorry.
Oh, sorry, thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much. You've done you've added to something there, which there was so much there already.
Thank you.
But you've really added something. I wondered if you could talk a little bit, following on from that point, about where in the process do you feel that the writing? How did you write that? Were you writing with the camera? Were you writing on the page? Were you writing sketches? And how much did you do with Timo? Is it in the
Timo, who's here? Timo, where are you?
Edit. Where does the story come from?
Timo's at the back. If there are any editing questions, Timo, would you come down to the front? Would you mind, in case? For me, I can't do structural stuff and writing stuff at the same time. So I but most of our films, Timo, would you say this is right? I try to come up with the structure a bit first, and in this case, these 5 bits, within that first martini with Beatrice Wells on that first night in Traverse City, Michigan, I knew that I wanted it to be pawn, knight, king, jester, or joker as I had it then. So I knew that Orson Welles' work would lend itself to a slightly more mythic structure than not a biographical thing. So once you put that bit, that was from the start, wasn't it, Timo? And then in the edit, I never write down really. I always have bits of paper, little torn up bits of paper, and then we work through scene by scene. Timo, is that right? And I would be. Timo arrives at 9:30, and I've tried to write the script at that morning from 8. So the script's ready. Is that right, Timo?
Yeah, I mean, Mark is incredibly, he is a dream for an editor, basically, because I think probably most of the funders that would say, even at that stage, he probably knows the film already quite well. So it is incredibly structured in the way that he basically, I very much feel like a first test audience almost. So he has ideas of okay, so let's have these scenes here and then this, and then the different sections within the Knight and King and all that, and then we just go through the sections basically. So yeah, it's for example, in the Chicago sequence or something, what would happen is Mark is okay, here are my Chicago shots. Let's just try and do a little montage of a minute or 2, or maybe it was longer and then we cut it down. But he always has a starting point, and we then just work through it like Mark just described, basically.
As a cinematographer, quickly, you clearly have found a lot of freedom creatively in the technology that you have, the digital technology and being able to move. I was kind of pissed at the end that you were the only cinematographer. It was kind of amazing that you travelled that far, and definitely there's moments like when you lift from the painting up to the mountain and back to the painting. Yeah. You're writing with the camera, and that was really exciting.
The camera, I'm old enough to. I started in the industry at the end of film, so I worked through the film, and then I went through that whole period where there's a big crew of people, and frankly, let's be honest, it tended to be men, and quite assertive guys who were really into the technology, and I didn't feel comfortable in that world particularly. So then I went and did other stuff, and then the technology miniaturized so much that you could have one of the cameras that I shot this on is in my rucksack, and the other you see there. So you're looking. For me, I'm best at making images when I'm on my own, and it's 7 in the morning and there's nobody else around. And so a lot of these pictures where you're seeing Morocco or Venice come from those those moments of quietude. Some people like a kind of sort of Sturm und Drang, a chaos. I can't work in those circumstances. So the imagery, if it's good, comes from escaping things in a way. I've done 2 films with Christopher Doyle, one of the great cinematographers who's done all the Wong Kar-wai films, and so I love working with actual cinematographers. But I also like shooting my own stuff for those reasons, because I found myself when I was younger standing behind a cinematographer saying left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, down a bit. What's the point of that? You might as well frame it yourself. So now that this technology is simpler, you can do that, and I love it. I feel when you press play or record, it's the zone. It's what sports people call the zone. It's entrancing. It's hypnotic. It's unforgettable. Thank you very much.
There's a lady here with a question.
I had a couple of questions actually. One was about the voiceover and the intimacy of the questions and the address to Wells. Did that come naturally to you, or was that something that you found over time through the editing process? And my second question was about the illustrations and how they were animated, and also the foley that was used, because I noticed it changed depending on the medium. I'd love to hear more about that.
Great. First thing on the voiceover, I knew that I've always been slightly wary of this kind of the objective male voice saying this is how it is, so I'd rather use a vocative, a subjective voice, because when you talk directly to someone, you get more into a slightly more emotional discourse. It makes it more intimate. This is a letter to a dead dad. This film. When my dad dropped dead age 56, and I had to do his eulogy, and I stood in front of the church and said, "Dear Dad," they were my first words, and I thought that was the best way for me to enrich what I had to say. And so it seemed natural. Obviously, he's Beatrice Wells' actual dad, but for a lot of us who love cinema, he's a sort of father figure in another way. So that's why I used that more personal thing. It's not the first time I've used it. I did a long thing to Pasolini. I did a thing to, I made a film where I talked to D.H. Lawrence and various people. On your second point with the animations, there's a really, really good animator that I know in Edinburgh called Danny Carr, and he's a Wells obsessive, and I just thought this is going to be a fun film. So Danny, are you free? Because guess what? We've got World Eyes of Orson Welles, and I'd like you to animate them. And I think he did a great job. I don't actually know how you do that exactly, because everything you saw there was an Orson Welles brush stroke. Nothing is Danny Carr, it's all Orson Welles. So he removes the brushstroke and then recreates it. And I can see that with a line, it must be easy to do, but with a watercolor where it bleeds, very impressive. On the Foley thing, there's the scrape of the pen, and there's the soft of the brush, and you want it hard and soft. Orson Welles was hard and soft, and you wanted that variation in the Foley.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful.
Thanks.
Do we have another audience question? No, everyone's quiet. I'd like to ask you about this image that you use repeatedly of Orson in the film, where he's both casual and quite intense with his stare. And the metaphor that you're using there, I wanted to ask why that image in particular, and that portrait in particular, was one that you wanted to return to and engage an audience with.
I think, Timo, early on we decided to go back to the one image. I wanted to have a sense of a listener. There's a danger that a film like this could just feel a bit disparate. But if you return to one image all the time, it's like you're holding his hand and letting it go, holding his hand and letting it go. The second point for me was, most of us know Orson Welles as a kind of old man with a grey beard, etc. But we have to remember that when he became famous, he was really young. He was in his 20s, and so I wanted to choose a picture when he was relatively young. The film's about his eyes, and so I wanted to choose an image where his eyes are beautiful. And so for those three reasons, that was the image. And I just thought he looked open-eyed, and not so much startled, a bit of startled, but he looked as if he was listening. And we tried other images, didn't we? But that one, almost immediately, we thought, is that right, Timo?
It's exactly that. I think it was just the impression, He's like slightly slumped over, which makes him kind of look a bit funny, but also just engaged. And I think very, very early on we were like, no, he looks like he's listening, so let's do. I think there was some comments later on where people said like, well, you use it a bit too much, and we were like, no, it's great. Let's use it a bit more.
And with your work with this film in particular recently, I think you're kind of increasingly looking at the other influences on film, the other forms of art that influence those filmmakers. I wondered if this, now having worked on Orson's, whether it's opened up a door to reframe other filmmakers who are familiar to us and kind of make them unfamiliar.
Yeah, good question. I studied art history. That was my love, so I try to get Tintoretto in every film when possible. So of course there's Tintoretto in here. But I think that Orson Welles was friends with Pablo Picasso, and he knew lots and lots of artists. So it's appropriate to contextualize him to see Tintoretto, to see some Soviet constructivist art that was very relevant to his work. More generally, if you spend time with filmmakers off duty, Martin Scorsese wants to talk about painting. Quite a few filmmakers are really, really interested in painting. Paul Schrader, etc. Kira Muratova, who died just a few days ago, one of the greatest living filmmakers. loved painting. And so we get our ideas from painting. If you look at pre-Renaissance painting, you see many story events within the one frame. If you look at one of the Adoration of the Magi, you might see Christ, and in fact I'm doing a talk tomorrow and I'm going to talk about this particular painting, but you see Christ and Mary and Joseph here, and in the same frame you see the shepherds and the kings and the angels. It's not four different stories, it's all one story. We can learn a lot from that as filmmakers. It's almost like a cubist sensibility, and if you look at one of the greatest Japanese filmmakers, Ozu, he's got that entirely, so I think that it's really good to think about painting when we're making films.
Yeah, and it also, with painting, as you mentioned, like when you have simultaneous narratives within one frame, in a sense you as the observer become the journey of the film through that.
Yeah, I must say I do like films that stay quite far back, and so your eyes get room to look around the frame. I do like that kind of thing, especially when multiple things are going on within the frame. Like another hero of mine, Chantal Ackerman, look at the way she held back her frames so much, in some of her best films. And so I love that. And I think we can learn from that. Of course, Derek Jarman was fascinated by painting, etc.
Are there more audience questions? There's one at the back here.
Mark, you spoke about the way that you framed your address to Wells. Did you always plan to have Wells talk back to you, and what was it like writing Wells?
Yes, I did. I always planned. It was the idea of this film came, as I say, with half a glass of martini, So I knew that he had to write back, and I thought, what should he say, and why don't I give him the funny bit or the sort of satirical bit? And he would say, yeah, that's all fine, but you've missed my satire. And so I knew that I had to do that bit. When it came to writing him, I've listened to Wells a lot, and he's got quite a baroque literary way of speaking. So things like "of which I spoke," I would never write that in a film, but I thought it'd be good if he would. And then there's a bit of Shakespeare at the beginning, and then there's Jared Manley Hopkins at the end, and Wells quoted a lot of stuff when he spoke, and I thought if I weave some of that in, it might have some flavour of Wells. I mean, obviously, I say in this film that it's a sort of dreaming of what Wells would speak like, so I'm not claiming that he would have spoke exactly like that, but I wanted to get the kind of slightly florid way of speaking that he had, and it was a lot of fun to do, and you need to break it up a little bit, and so this is quite a long film, as you've just seen, and so you want to drop a little bomb of surprise into the film. Jack Claff, who did Orson, is very, very good, and poor Jack, I would love to involve him in the publicity of this film, but until it gets released, I would like it to be a surprise for the audience that Orson speaks back.
That was the one thing I was going to say, that it seems like that would have been a fun thing to do.
It really was fun, and we took to record this, because Orson Welles is actually quite hard to do, so we recorded this great actor, Jack Claff, who's in Star Wars and Bond movies, etc. And then I said, do you want to drink some whiskey? And I had read, Mercedes McCambridge, who did the voice of The Exorcist in The Exorcist. She had herself tied to a chair, and she had raw eggs dropped into her throat before they recorded the voice of the devil. So I said to Jack, let's drink half a bottle of whiskey, and we did. And then we recorded it, and he said, right, wake me up at 7 in the morning. And he said, my voice is really deep at 7 in the morning. I thought, yeah. And I woke him up, and he sounded like Barry White. That was perfect.
Great, I think there's another question just by the camera.
Hi. Over there.
That's a beautiful creative film, a very mundane question. So it's about the extracts, of his own films, not the interviews. So how much of a bother And how was it expensive? Was it to get all those? And did you get all the extracts you wanted? Because it's sort of, anyway, that's
Can
the
I
question.
ask my producer to answer that question, Adam Dodd? Stand about it.
Yeah, hi. So we use fair dealing and fair use in America, so we don't pay for anything, we don't license anything. It's covered by the exception under the Copyright Act. So in one sense it's really easy. Mark just says what he wants to do and cuts it together and does the commentary, and fair dealing, fair use is a kind of huge grey area, because it's not like there are rules that you can exactly meet. It's just a question, it's a defence in case anybody sues you. So, John Archer and I could probably do hours of seminars on this, having done films with Mark. But you're always sort of heading slightly into unknown territory. But until somebody challenges it, so the basic principle is it's criticism and review. So Mark has to, every image, he has to say enough about it that is critical or reviewing in order to meet the criterion, and you can't take more than a certain vague percentage of the work in total. You can only take a small portion of it, which is why you can do it with film, but you can't do it very easily with a painting. For example, we couldn't have fair dealt any of the paintings because you're using the whole painting. There is a legal process you go through with lawyers, and the lawyers in America and in the UK have to go through the film and tell you, this is mostly fine, but that clip is too long, or you don't say enough in the clip, and then you send it out there.
But it's not, I wouldn't do a film, I wouldn't use fair use if it didn't fit with the spirit of the film. It fits with the spirit of this film. Each clip in this film, in some ways being assessed in terms of where did it come from, and Orson Welles' visual imagination, that's why it fits.
Yeah. The whole point is it's got to be fair. The key word is fair use, fair dealing is fair, and the fairness is that Mark is not taking from the work, he's adding to it, essentially. He's bringing something to it which wasn't there before. The principle of fair use is slightly different from fair dealing. The principle of fair use is to do with taking the work out of its original context and putting it into a new context. So you're thinking about how, rather than thinking about what's actually going on in the film, you're thinking about how Orson Welles was thinking about it when he made it. As long as the spirit, the point is the spirit has got to be right, and then if it is, then it works.
I'm aware that many of you need to make a screening at Showroom 4 in about 10 minutes, so we're going to draw this to a close. Please put your hands together for Mark.